I recently purchased a Jinhao X750, but was unhappy with the nib that came with it. Sorry about that, man. On the recommendation of several reviewers, I replaced the faulty nib with a Goulet medium, and now the Jinhao writes as smooth as Isaac from the Love Boat. Nice reference there. Are the Goulet nibs made and smoothed to a specific specification? That's a kind of a double talk there. Or do the, not double talk, but yes, specific specification. Or do the Goulet nibs come straight off? I just noticed that though. It's like says the same thing twice. Okay. Or do the Goulet nibs come straight off of the line and then smooth when they arrive at Goulet HQ? Thanks. Okay, so we get our, I'm just noticing like how many of the questions today are really building upon each other. I swear it was actually kind of random the way I stacked them in here, but each question is like being segued from the previous one. So yes, we get our nibs from Jowo in Germany. We get them in large batches. You can look, I think on Instagram last week we posted a picture of like just pile of nibs that we get, right? So that's how we get them. We get a whole bunch of them at a time. We have to order them in pretty decent quantities. They come from Jowo like pre-adjusted and stuff like that, but these are steel nibs. They're not like super high-end nice nibs in the grand scheme of things. They're relatively inexpensive, so it's not basically when it comes to nibs, there's a lot of manufacturing, a lot of handwork that's involved to really tune them. There's really no machine that tunes nibs perfectly. Pretty much any nibmeister or anybody that you talk to, any pen manufacturer that sells like especially higher end pens, ultimately the final step is going to come down to is a human being writing with this pen and making sure it writes well. There's no machine that's going to be able to test essentially how well a pen writes because it's not written with a machine. It's written by human beings. So you have to make sure that you got the human factor in there, and the easiest way to do that is to have a human test it. So I actually don't know how much human testing is involved on Jowo's part. I just don't know. That said, the quality and reliability is really pretty high with them, just as they come to us. That said, because it has our logo on it, it's got our name on these things, we want to make sure that they're awesome. So we check and test every single nib. We do. We build it into the cost of the nib. It's part of what you're paying for when you buy a nib from us, as opposed to maybe some, $2 nib off eBay or something like that. Part of what you're paying for is our team to actually test every single one of these things. So the reliability of these is going to be much higher because we take that time to do that. So it's not that like the Jowo makes bad nibs or anything like that. It's just we want to make sure that every nib that goes out is awesome. That's really about it. Even if there's a 1% margin, right? A 1% defect rate or something like that. That's 1%. That's 1 out of every 100 people that are not going to be happy and that could go out and say a bad thing about our name. I don't want that to happen. So I want the margin to be 0%. So that's why we test every single one. So that's part of why you're dealing with it. I mean, you're talking about a Jinhao X750, that we are selling at retail costs for $10 versus a nib that we're selling at, $15. So the Goulet nib alone costs more than the whole Jinhao. So you can bet that there's not a lot of handwork going on with that Jinhao. Not to say that maybe you couldn't smooth it out and kind of get it there and do a little tweaking yourself. A lot of people do that. And generally speaking, the Jinhao nibs that come are usually pretty decent, but you're going to have a margin there. You're going to have a factor of some nibs that just aren't going to work as great. And we'll always try to make it right. Like if you just feel like the thing is junk and all that, don't feel like you can't buy the pen and then you have to buy a Goulet nib to go on it. Usually the reason that people buy the Goulet nib to go on the Jinhao, it's the same number 6 size nib, so it swaps fairly easily. But the main reason is because we only have the Jinhaos in a medium nib, and we got the Goulet in extra fine, medium, broad, 1.1 and 1.5 stub. So you get a full range. That's usually why people are swapping them out, not necessarily because the nibs that come on them are junk. Because actually they're pretty decent for as inexpensive as a pen as it is. So that's kind of where I go with that. So we do all the testing in-house.